Hello. 2 years ago, almost to the day, I found myself stranded in the middle of Queensland on the side of a road in my car. And it wasn't just me. I had my 9-year-old, my 7-year-old, my 4-year-old and my 1-year-old with me. Now, we were on our way home to Victoria from Queensland, but my husband had flown out the day before to do some volunteer disaster relief. And so I was alone with my kids. And we had 3 days to get home because I was hosting an in-person event. But it had been raining a lot. And after a day of driving past flooded fields and roads covered with water, I came to a patch in the road where there was a sharp bend. And the water was flowing over the road, fast and deep. I stopped the car. So picture this, it's getting dark. We are quite literally in the middle of nowhere. Maybe 2 hours from the last tiny little town, about an hour from the next. My kids are getting hungry. I have maybe half a pack of potato chips left in the car. And as I reach for my phone, I realise I have no reception. Great. So I decided then that the best thing to do would be to see how deep the water was and compare that to the underside of the car to find out if I could drive the car through the water without getting the water inside the car. So I pull to the side, secure my kids, take off my shoes and socks, pull up my pant legs, and I wander out into the water. Now at this point, you're probably already realising what took me up to my knees in floodwater to recognise, which is the stupidity of my decision. Now, yes, I was knee-deep in floodwater in the middle of Queensland. And being from Victoria and very ignorant about these kind of things, the primary thought going through my mind was, I'm going to get eaten by a crocodile. Now, I still have no idea how true that statement actually was, but I wasn't even halfway to the bend and I still couldn't see around it. And so I decided the best thing to do would be to go back to the car. And then I did what any other intelligent woman whose husband normally handles all of the car jobs would do, and I reached for the manual. Now, this made my situation out to be even worse. The rule book tells me that I shouldn't be driving in water more than 10 centimetres. Now, you can see I've been driving in more than that all day, and the car was still hanging out, like humming along quite nicely, along with the crickets next to our new river. But at that point, the panic in me is really starting to bubble up because I have absolutely no idea what the right thing to do is. Do we go back the 2 hours and hope that there's somewhere to stay and somewhere to feed my kids? Do I find a farm door to knock on? Or do we sleep in the car and hope that we don't get washed away in the middle of the river? Thankfully then I saw it, coming around the bend. Headlights, hope. And so I got out of the car and I waved down this gigantic four-wheel drive coming my way. Thankfully, they stop. He looks at me, looks at my car, pops my hood, and gives me a 5-minute lesson in four-wheel driving. Now, I'm in a 6-year-old family SUV. Definitely nothing fancy, but I quickly learnt that she has a diesel engine and she takes in air from all of the right places. I also learnt that when driving through a river or a flood, you have to drive slowly enough for the water to go away from the car and not come up on over it, FYI. So much for 10 centimetres, I thought. So I threw that rule book back in the glove box and I continued on my way. Now they say that with knowledge comes power, and that's exactly what I had. I could take control of the situation and have freedom within the boundaries I'd been given. Freedom within boundaries. Now that's a relationship that I've been exploring my entire adult life. I quickly learnt after school that the Monday to Friday 9 to 5 gig was not for me. So I quit to get 3 different jobs working more hours, but that's what suited me. That theme continued. About 7 years ago, I started my own agency because I was declined flexi time from my employer. And ever since, I've been supporting women to build lives and businesses for, you guessed it, freedom. So for our purposes today, let's define freedom as Google does. The power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants. Now, if we're using this definition of freedom, whether we're talking about personal, political, spiritual, or economic freedom, what we're really talking about here is choice. And most of us in the Western world have the ability and the privilege to choose. We get to choose where we live, where we work, who we associate with, and how we spend our days. That's choice. And with choice, there is always a trade-off. If we say yes to something, we say no, or not yet, to the alternative. But freedom is deeper than choice. The undercurrent, the hidden underlying force, is what gives us the ability to make the choice. So without delving into the socio-cultural factors of this, we get to choose where we live if we have the means and the resources to do so. We get to choose the type of work that we do within the boundaries of having or gaining the right skill set. Resources. Typically, the more resources we have, the less constraints we have. And you would think then that this is where freedom lies. But that's the paradox. The paradox of freedom is that we can have freedom only when we have constraints. So let me explain. Can you imagine roads without traffic rules? Well, maybe we could go to Southeast Asia and see a little bit of this in action. What about businesses without contracts? Well, there would be no predictability or security in commercial arrangements. What about kids without bedtime? Now I can see all the parents are smiling because we all know how that ends. Now, Plato even suggested that in a collective, unlimited freedom would lead to its opposite, because without constraints, it would lead to the tyranny of the strong over the weak. But what does that mean for you and for me? Let's make it personal. Most weeks, my calendar looks something like this. Yes, really. Everything's on the calendar. Work and family commitments, yes, of course, but also laundry and workouts and date night. Everything. Now, I show this to some people and they tell me that it looks more like a prison than freedom. But the truth is that because of and within the structure, I feel like I have freedom because there is no to-do list, only time slots. So when I'm with a client, I'm with a client and I'm really deep inside their business. I'm not worrying about my inbox or my kids. When I'm with my kids, I'm not worrying about my business because I know everything has a time slot. Some then would say that the price for freedom is discipline. And yes, we do need to make tough personal choices in alignment with the goals that we have for ourselves, because remember, the trade-off. We say yes to something, we say no to the alternative. But again, it's deeper than discipline. When we're not constantly holding the weight of this never-ending to-do list, we get to be fully present, and the weight of the mental load is lifted. Now, this is important because research out of the University of Melbourne tells us that the mental load is invisible, without boundaries, and never ending. Sounds fun, right? Well, it definitely doesn't sound fun when the kindergarten calls you 30 minutes past pickup time, letting you know that you have forgotten to pick up your child. Now, yes, this really happened. It was a few years ago, and life was full. We were in a building, I had a newborn, and I was running 3 businesses. In other words, I was attempting to operate completely beyond capacity. And I'm sure that you can relate in some sense. We are all juggling these constant demands, decisions, and distractions. Work, friends, family life, home, health, hobbies, global events. There's this massive information overload. And as a result, in society, what we're seeing is decreased productivity, increased stress and anxiety, sleep disorders, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Thankfully, intentionality and structure go a really long way to providing freedom from this. Structure allows us to be present. We get to really be where our feet are. And when we're present, our minds can focus and our creativity can flow. And that feels like freedom to me. A sense or mirage of control, peace, and space to deal with life's unexpected curveballs. But let's talk about the curveballs, because although we might like life to fit inside these nice multicolored little boxes, we all know that life's full of surprises. We need margin, some buffer, a little bit of wiggle room. There gets to be movement within the structure. Now, in the practical context of our calendars, this looks like both having white space for the unexpected and giving yourself permission to move things around. It also helps if we have margin in terms of limits for minimums and maximums, where we decide ahead of time what our standards are for ourselves in terms of our work output, our sleep, our exercise, and everything else. Because in most cases, we do get to choose. The most important part then in any situation becomes knowing what type of constraints to put into place, how and when. And that comes down to knowing what matters to us. And if that differs then from the norm that we know and that we see around us, it's having the courage to step out of that norm. Courage because pursuing freedom often means going against the grain. This is when we make hard decisions. And this is when we can trust our intuition. And this is when we reach out for guidance. And it's through these tough conversations and these moments of introspection that we discover that we really do have the power and the strength to choose. And that's what freedom really means to me. The ability to behave and change our minds within the structure that we've set for ourselves and in alignment with what matters to us. So would I let my kids pick their bedtime? Or disobey the road rules if I'm running late? Or maybe switch my diet to exclusively pasta and chocolate? Well, tempting, but no. But could we go for a midnight walk? Or live overseas for a year? Or have dessert for breakfast? Yes, please. Because life is an adventure. You never know what's coming around that bend. And sometimes it's okay to throw away the rule book. Thank you.